The flight attendant stood over her with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sorry, but we need this seat for a real pilot. You'll have to move to the back." Everyone watched as she gathered her things without protest, her face calm despite the public humiliation. 3 hours later, when severe turbulence hit and systems began failing, panic spread through the cabin. As the captain struggled for control, her voice came from the back, using terms only aviation experts would know. "What's your call sign?" the co-pilot asked desperately. Her answer made the entire cockpit freeze in shock. "Maverick." From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you value stories of quiet excellence and unrecognized heroes, consider subscribing for more narratives that celebrate those who lead through competence rather than authority. San Francisco International Airport buzzed with the controlled chaos of a Monday morning. Sunlight streamed through massive windows, casting geometric patterns across the polished floors of Terminal 2, as travelers moved with varying degrees of urgency toward their destinations. At Gate 37A, boarding had just begun for Flight 2937 to Washington, D.C. Lieutenant Commander Alexis Reeves joined the priority boarding line, her movements efficient but unhurried. At 33, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had navigated far more challenging environments than a civilian airport. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her attire, navy blue blazer over a white blouse, tailored gray slacks, was chosen for comfort during the 6-hour flight rather than to make any particular impression. Boarding pass? The gate agent's professional smile brightened marginally as she scanned Alexis's QR code. "Seat 2B, just behind the cockpit. Enjoy your flight." "Thank you," Alexis replied, shouldering her leather messenger bag as she moved toward the jet bridge. Once on board, flight attendant Marisol welcomed her with the practiced warmth reserved for first-class passengers. "Good morning. Right this way." Alexis settled into 2B, stowing her bag in the overhead compartment after removing a technical journal and tablet. As other passengers filed past toward the main cabin, she opened the journal to an article featuring complex aeronautical diagrams and equations. Her fingers traced a particular sequence with practiced familiarity, her brow furrowing slightly at a specific calculation. For the next 20 minutes, she remained absorbed in her reading, occasionally making notations in the margins with a mechanical pencil. The sounds of boarding, rolling luggage, passenger chatter, overhead bins closing, formed a background hum that she had long ago learned to filter out. Her concentration was only broken when a shadow fell across her page. "Excuse me, miss." Alexis looked up to find flight attendant Dorothea, mid-50s with a name tag indicating 26 years of service, standing in the aisle with an apologetic but firm expression. "I'm afraid there's been a change. We need this seat for a pilot who's flying last minute to D.C. for an emergency assignment. I'll need to relocate you." Alexis maintained a neutral expression, though her eyes briefly flicked to the lounge areas where deadheading crew typically sat. "My upgrade was confirmed yesterday. I understand, but we need these seats for aviation personnel. It's policy," Dorothea explained with the subtle condescension of someone addressing a passenger who couldn't possibly understand airline operations. "These priority seats are reserved for pilots when needed." Behind Dorothea stood Captain Wesley Riordan, his imposing height exaggerated by the aircraft's low ceiling. 4 gold stripes adorned each shoulder of his immaculate uniform, and he carried himself with the confident expectation of someone accustomed to deference. He glanced at Alexis with polite impatience. Several nearby passengers watched the interaction with uncomfortable expressions, but no one spoke up. The first-class cabin had fallen conspicuously quiet. Alexis studied Dorothea's face briefly, then Captain Riordan's expectant stance. She closed her journal and stood with fluid grace. "I understand. We can offer you a seat in row 27, Dorothea said, clearly relieved to avoid confrontation. "And a complimentary beverage service." "Thank you," Alexis replied, her voice neither resentful nor acquiescent, simply matter of fact. As she gathered her belongings, a whispered exchange between 2 passengers in row 3 carried clearly in the quiet cabin. Who did she think she was? Those seats are for real aviation professionals. If Alexis heard, her expression revealed nothing as she followed Dorothea toward the back of the plane. She was reassigned to middle seat 27E, wedged between a man already asleep against the window and another spreading reports across his tray table before takeoff. Neither acknowledged her as she settled in, reclaiming her journal from her bag before stowing it under the seat. The plane pushed back from the gate 15 minutes later. Captain Elliot Gordon's voice came over the intercom, smooth and reassuring. "Good morning from the flight deck. This is Captain Gordon, welcoming you aboard Flight 2937 to Washington, D.C. Our flight time today will be approximately 5 hours and 23 minutes. We're expecting clear conditions until we approach the Ohio Valley, where we may encounter some turbulence. We've adjusted our route slightly to minimize any discomfort, so sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight." Alexis listened intently to his announcement, a slight furrow appearing between her brows at his mention of weather patterns. She pulled out her phone, checking a weather app before the final call to switch to airplane mode. Her thumb traced a pattern across the radar map, following the same path their flight would take. The takeoff was smooth, the Boeing 737 lifting effortlessly into clear California skies. As the aircraft climbed to cruising altitude, Alexis returned to her technical journal, though her attention periodically shifted to the feel of the aircraft, noting minute vibrations and sounds that most passengers would never notice. The businessman beside her finally glanced her way when the drink service began. "Business or pleasure?" he asked with perfunctory politeness. "Work," Alexis replied simply. "What field?" "Aviation systems." He nodded without real interest, returning to his spreadsheets. The conversation, such as it was, ended there. 3 hours into the flight, the seatbelt sign illuminated with a soft chime. Most passengers had settled into the rhythm of long-haul travel, some sleeping, others watching movies or working. The cabin service had concluded, and flight attendants had just begun collecting trash when the first jolt hit. The aircraft shuddered, then dropped suddenly before stabilizing. A few passengers gasped. Overhead bins rattled. The captain's voice returned over the intercom, noticeably tenser than before. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts immediately." The shaking intensified. A water bottle rolled down the aisle. A child began crying several rows ahead. Alexis sat perfectly still, her eyes not on her reading material anymore, but tracking specific movements of the aircraft. Her head tilted slightly, listening to the engines with focused attention. When the plane lurched again, dropping more severely, her hand moved to the armrest, not gripping it in fear, but feeling the particular vibration pattern through her fingertips. Oxygen masks dropped in the forward cabin section, triggering audible panic. Flight attendants struggled to maintain composure as they secured loose items and checked passenger seatbelts. Dorothea passed Alexis's row, gripping seatbacks for stability. The intercom crackled with internal communications that accidentally broadcast to the cabin. "Primary systems failing. Manual override isn't responding." The businessman beside Alexis closed his laptop, white-knuckled. "That didn't sound good." "It's not turbulence," Alexis said quietly, more to herself than him. "What?" "This isn't weather. It's systems failure." The man stared at her, confusion mixing with fear. "How could you possibly know that?" Alexis didn't answer. Instead, she pulled a small notebook from her pocket and began making calculations, her handwriting steady despite the plane's continued shaking. After completing a sequence of numbers, she looked up and raised her hand, catching Dorothea's attention. "Excuse me," she called. "You need to inform the cockpit they're experiencing cascading electrical failure, not weather-related turbulence." Dorothea's professional mask slipped momentarily, revealing stress and irritation. "Please remain calm and in your seat, miss. The plane's pitch is inconsistent with turbulence patterns." Alexis persisted, her voice taking on a subtle authority that hadn't been present during boarding. "The vibration frequency suggests mechanical issues with the stabilizers." Other passengers now looked at her with expressions ranging from hope to skepticism. The businessman beside her whispered, "Are you a pilot or something?" Before she could answer, the plane lurched violently sideways. The cabin lights flickered. A coffee mug shattered somewhere in the back galley. Dorothea, visibly shaken, returned to Alexis. "How do you know this?" "I have some experience," Alexis replied calmly. "Please tell the captain he needs to initiate vector correction and bypass the automated systems." Dorothea hesitated, clearly torn between protocol and the growing evidence that this passenger might actually know something valuable. She moved to the intercom phone and had a brief, intense conversation, glancing back at Alexis repeatedly. Moments later, First Officer Jameson Teller's voice came through on the cabin speakers. If there's someone on board with aviation experience who just sent advice forward, please identify yourself to a flight attendant immediately. Alexis raised her hand. Dorothea approached with the phone. What's your name and credentials? Lieutenant Commander Alexis Reeves, Naval Aviation, she replied. Tell them they need to disconnect the flight management system and fly manually before the stabilizers lock. Dorothea relayed this information, her eyes widening at whatever response she received through the handset. The plane continued to shake, but slightly less violently than before. The first officer wants to know your call sign, she said, voice trembling slightly. The question landed with unexpected weight. Alexis paused, her expression shifting subtly as calculations of a different sort ran behind her eyes. The entire section of the cabin had gone quiet, straining to hear her response. Maverick, she said simply. The effect was immediate. Dorothea's face transformed from skepticism to shock. Her hand holding the phone dropped slightly as she stared at Alexis with new eyes. They want you in the cockpit immediately, she managed, voice barely above a whisper. As Dorothea guided Alexis forward through the unsteady aircraft, confused whispers followed them. Passengers who had ignored her earlier now watched with a mixture of curiosity and desperate hope. Those seated near the front, including the first-class cabin where she'd originally been assigned, stared openly as she passed. The walk to the cockpit felt endless, the aircraft continuing to shake as they made their way forward. At the forward galley, Marisol waited with the cockpit key, her professional composure cracking with visible relief at Alexis's approach. Thank God, she whispered as she unlocked the reinforced door. Whatever you can do. The cockpit of Flight 2937 presented a stark contrast to the controlled chaos of the cabin. Warning lights flashed across control panels, casting an ominous red glow over the cramped space. Captain Elliot Gordon, mid-40s with premature gray at his temples, sat rigid in the left seat, hands fighting the controls. First Officer Jameson Teller occupied the right seat, frantically cycling through emergency procedures on a tablet. Both men turned as Alexis entered, their expressions ranging from disbelief to desperate hope. "You're Maverick?" Captain Gordon asked, his earlier confident tone replaced by strained uncertainty. "Yes," Alexis confirmed without elaboration, already scanning the instrument panels. Her eyes moved methodically across the displays, assessing system status with practiced efficiency. "You've got cascading electrical failure affecting your fly-by-wire systems. The turbulence was coincidental, but it triggered the instability." She moved toward the center console without waiting for permission. "I need direct access to override protocols." "Those are protected systems," First Officer Teller objected, though his protest lacked conviction given their circumstances. "I designed them," Alexis responded, without looking up, fingers already navigating through security screens with practiced familiarity. "The standard recovery procedure won't work because your primary electrical bus is compromised." Captain Gordon's expression shifted as recognition dawned. "You're that Maverick, the one who created the Reeves protocol for catastrophic systems failure." Teller's head snapped up, finally connecting the call sign to its significance. The Reeves protocol was standard training in commercial aviation, emergency procedures for handling cascading electrical failures that had saved dozens of aircraft since its implementation 3 years earlier. "We don't have time for introductions," Alexis stated, her focus unwavering. "I need manual control now." Captain Gordon nodded, making a quick decision. "She's all yours." First Officer Teller vacated his seat, and Alexis slid into position with fluid efficiency. Her hands moved across the controls with practiced precision, implementing a sequence of commands that neither pilot recognized from standard procedures. The violent shaking began to subside as the aircraft responded to her adjustments. "What are you doing?" Teller asked, watching in fascination over her shoulder. "Implementing a beta protocol that hasn't been fully integrated into commercial systems yet," she explained, without breaking concentration. "It bypasses the automated recovery to prevent overcorrection." Captain Gordon watched her hands with growing amazement. "They teach us about your methods at recurrent training. They told us you were a theoretical engineer, not an active pilot." "I'm both," Alexis replied simply. We need to inform ATC we're diverting to Cleveland. We can't risk continuing with compromised systems. As she initiated contact with air traffic control, her confidence and command presence transformed the atmosphere in the cockpit. The same technical language and calm authority that had seemed presumptuous coming from a passenger now emanated from her naturally, compelling immediate respect and compliance from ground controllers. Cleveland approach, this is United 2937 declaring an emergency. We're experiencing multiple electrical failures affecting flight controls, requesting priority landing, full emergency response. The controller's response was immediate. United 2937, Cleveland approach, priority landing approved. Descend and maintain flight level 240. Proceed direct to waypoint Emory. Emergency services are being notified. Descend and maintain flight level 240, direct Emory, United 2937. Alexis confirmed, her hands making minute adjustments to the controls as she spoke. Captain Gordon stared at her profile as realization continued to sink in. You're the reason I'm still flying. Pittsburgh, 2019. We had a similar failure in a storm. I used your protocol. They said it was untested, but it was the only option. Alexis nodded slightly, remaining focused on stabilizing their approach to Cleveland. The aircraft still shuddered occasionally, but the violent oscillations had subsided under her control. Why were you in economy? You were in 2B originally, weren't you? Teller asked, suddenly connecting the dots. I saw your name on the manifest during pre-flight. It doesn't matter now, Alexis responded, guiding the aircraft through a controlled descent. Please prepare the cabin for emergency landing. Teller hesitated, then moved to the intercom to brief the flight attendants. Captain Gordon remained in his seat, monitoring systems while Alexis flew the aircraft with a precision that seemed almost preternatural given the compromised controls. I need to tell the passengers something, Gordon said after a moment. They deserve to know who's saving their lives. Alexis didn't respond immediately, her attention on a new warning light that had illuminated on the panel. She implemented another sequence of commands before nodding. Your aircraft. Make the announcement. Captain Gordon took the intercom, his voice steady once more. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Gordon. We experienced a significant systems malfunction, but we've regained control and are diverting to Cleveland for safety. I want to assure you that we are in the very capable hands of Lieutenant Commander Alexis Reeves, call sign Maverick, whose emergency protocols are the reason many of us in aviation are still flying today. Please follow all crew instructions for an emergency landing. We expect to be on the ground in approximately 15 minutes. As he replaced the handset, he caught Alexis's eye. They should know. Focus on the approach, she replied, but the slight softening around her eyes suggested she wasn't entirely opposed to his gesture. In the main cabin, Gordon's announcement had created a ripple of confused whispers. Passengers exchanged glances, trying to process this unexpected information. In row 3, the two passengers who had commented on Alexis's removal from first class sat in uncomfortable silence. Did he say Maverick? One finally whispered. As in, the Maverick protocol? His companion nodded slowly. My brother's a flight instructor. He talks about those protocols like they're gospel. Meanwhile, Dorothea moved quickly through the cabin, instructing passengers on emergency procedures. Her demeanor had transformed completely. The slight condescension replaced by focused professionalism, tinged with regret whenever her gaze fell on row 27, now empty of its middle occupant. Cleveland Hopkins International Airport appeared through breaks in the cloud cover as they descended. Emergency vehicles lined the runway, their lights flashing against the gray afternoon. Despite the compromised systems, Alexis guided the aircraft through a textbook approach, compensating manually for the electrical instabilities. Your aircraft for landing, she said to Gordon as they reached final approach, following proper protocol for transfer of control. No, Gordon replied firmly. You've got this. I'll back you up. Alexis nodded once, then returned her full attention to landing the crippled aircraft. The touchdown was smoother than many passengers had experienced in normal conditions, a testament to skill that transcended the emergency circumstances. As the aircraft decelerated, a collective exhale seemed to pass through the cabin, followed by spontaneous applause. After taxiing to their designated area, emergency response teams approached the aircraft as a precaution. Captain Gordon completed the shutdown checklist, then turned to Alexis with profound respect in his expression. "Lieutenant Commander Reeves, I don't know how to thank you." "Just doing my job," she replied simply, standing to exit the cockpit. "No," Gordon countered, rising as well. "Your job was to sit in 2B and read technical journals. Instead, you saved 183 lives today, including mine. That deserves acknowledgement." He gestured for her to precede him into the cabin. As they emerged, an unusual silence fell over the previously jubilant passengers. All eyes fixed on Alexis, many trying to reconcile the unassuming woman with the expert who had just saved their lives. Captain Gordon turned to her in full view of the entire cabin and rendered a formal, military-style salute, the highest sign of respect one aviator can show another. "Lieutenant Commander Reeves, on behalf of everyone aboard, thank you." The cabin erupted in renewed applause, passengers rising to their feet in a spontaneous standing ovation. Alexis accepted the acknowledgement with a slight nod, clearly uncomfortable with the attention, but recognizing its importance to the passengers' emotional recovery from the ordeal. Dorothea approached as the applause finally subsided, visible embarrassment coloring her features. "Commander, I owe you an apology. I had no idea." "You were doing your job," Alexis interrupted gently. "No apology necessary." "But I removed you from your seat," Dorothea persisted. "If you hadn't been on this flight—" "But I was," Alexis replied. "That's all that matters." The passengers began the process of disembarking, though many lingered, clearly hoping for a moment with the woman who had saved their lives. As they filed past, many stopped to offer personal thanks. Several asked for autographs or photos, which Alexis politely declined. Captain Wesley Riordan, the pilot who had taken her seat, approached last. His earlier imperious bearing had vanished, replaced by genuine humility. "I've spent 20 years hearing about Maverick protocols and training," he said quietly. "Used them twice myself." He extended his hand. "Never thought I'd meet you like this." Alexis shook his hand with a small smile. "Technically, you haven't met me yet. I'm just a passenger." "Not anymore," Riordan replied seriously. "Word's already spreading through company channels. The brass knows who was on this flight." Before Alexis could respond, a young girl, about 12, with dark braids and serious eyes, approached hesitantly. "Excuse me, ma'am?" Alexis turned, her expression softening. "Yes?" "My dad's a pilot for Delta," the girl said. "He says someday I could be one too, but some of the boys at school say girls can't be real pilots." Alexis knelt to meet her at eye level. "What's your name?" "Zoe," the girl answered. "Well, Zoe, your dad's right. And remember, a good pilot isn't defined by their uniform or seat assignment, but by what they know and how they act when it matters." The girl nodded solemnly, understanding something profound beyond her years. "Thank you for saving us." "You're very welcome," Alexis replied. "Maybe someday you'll do the same for someone else." Zoe's mother, watching nearby, mouthed a silent thank you as she guided her daughter toward the exit. As the last passengers disembarked, Captain Gordon approached Alexis again. "Cleveland's not your final destination, is it?" "No, I need to get to DC eventually." "The company is arranging transportation for everyone," he explained. "But given the circumstances, I thought you might prefer something more direct." Alexis raised an eyebrow questioningly. "There's a Navy transport scheduled to depart in 2 hours. I took the liberty of making a call. They'd be honored to have you aboard." Alexis considered this for a moment. "Thank you, Captain. That would be appreciated." 2 hours later, the Cleveland Airport terminal buzzed with activity as passengers from Flight 2937 awaited their rebooked connections. Many had shared their experiences on social media, and news crews had begun arriving, hoping for interviews with passengers or, ideally, with the mysterious Maverick herself. Alexis had managed to avoid the media attention, finding a quiet corner in the terminal to review notes on her tablet. Most of her fellow passengers had been dispersed to various gates, but a sense of shared experience lingered among those still waiting. Occasional glances in her direction suggested her identity had become common knowledge throughout the terminal. "Commander Reeves?" Alexis looked up to find an imposing woman in an executive suit approaching, accompanied by Captain Gordon and Dorothea. The woman's bearing suggested authority, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized sharp features. "I'm Executive Vice President Bellamy Frost," she introduced herself. "I've just reviewed the preliminary incident report." What you did today was extraordinary. I was just applying protocols that should be standard, Alexis responded modestly. Your protocols, Frost emphasized, the same ones that have saved hundreds of lives across the industry. Yet, you were removed from your assigned seat to accommodate another pilot. Dorothea looked down, embarrassed. I didn't know who she was. That's the point, Captain Gordon interjected. None of us should need to know someone's credentials or achievements to treat them with respect. Frost nodded in agreement. Commander, we'd like to offer you permanent executive platinum status with our airline and ensure this type of incident never happens again. That's not necessary, Alexis replied, but perhaps review your training modules. The warning signs were there before systems failure occurred. Frost looked surprised but made a note. Of course, your insights would be invaluable to our safety team. As the airline representatives departed, Alexis noticed several passengers watching the interaction. The recognition in their eyes was different now, not celebrity worship, but a deeper respect for quiet competence that had been invisible to them hours earlier. Captain Gordon lingered behind. You know, Maverick isn't just a call sign anymore. It's become shorthand for innovation that breaks rules to save lives. Alexis smiled slightly. I never set out to break rules, just to fix problems others didn't see yet. That's what makes you Maverick, Gordon replied. Going back to Washington? Eventually, I have some testing to complete first. Whatever it is, I hope it becomes another protocol they teach us, he said, rendering one final salute before departing. Alexis watched him go, then returned to her technical journal, already focused on the next problem to solve, the next life-saving innovation that would carry her name without most ever knowing the woman behind it. Beyond the terminal windows, Flight 2937 sat on the tarmac, undergoing inspection by maintenance crews. The aircraft that had nearly been lost now waited safely on solid ground, visible evidence of how quickly circumstances could change, how expertise hidden in plain sight could transform disaster into redemption, and how true respect was earned not through appearances or assumptions, but through actions when they mattered most. As Alexis gathered her belongings to board the Navy transport, her phone vibrated with a message. It was from Dr. Elaine Winters, her research partner at the Naval Aviation Development Center. Heard about your flight. Glad you're safe. How much of Protocol 37B did you use? Alexis typed back, all of it. It works. We should implement immediately, not wait for next quarter's review. Winters' response was immediate. Agreed. The Admiral wants a full briefing when you arrive. And Lex, the whole team's proud of you. For the first time since the emergency, Alexis felt a genuine smile form. The public recognition meant little to her compared to this acknowledgement from her peers, the engineers and test pilots who understood exactly what she had accomplished, both in developing the protocols and in implementing them under the most challenging conditions. The Navy transport proved considerably less comfortable than the commercial airliner, but Alexis found the familiar military efficiency strangely comforting after the day's events. She settled into her seat, finally allowing herself to feel the physical and emotional fatigue that followed such intense focus. Captain Larson, the transport pilot, approached before takeoff. Commander Reeves, word of what you did reached us pretty quickly. The crew and I just wanted to say it's an honor to have you aboard. Thank you, Captain. We'll get you to Andrews without any excitement, he promised with a smile, though I suspect you've had enough of that for one day. As the transport lifted off, Alexis glanced down at Cleveland growing smaller below. Somewhere down there, 183 people were continuing their journeys, carrying with them a story they would tell for years to come. A story about hidden capabilities, about judgment too quickly rendered and dramatically reversed, about a quiet woman whose expertise had transformed potential tragedy into triumph. But the real story, the one they wouldn't know to tell, was about the years of work that had preceded this day. The countless hours in simulators, the meticulous documentation of failure scenarios, the pushback from committees who deemed her protocols too experimental or unnecessarily complex, the persistence required to transform theoretical understanding into practical applications that pilots could implement under the most stressful conditions imaginable. Today, those efforts had culminated in a moment where theory met reality in the most direct way possible. The true victory wasn't just the safe landing of one aircraft, but the validation of approaches that would save many more in the future. That was what mattered most to Alexis. Not the recognition or the gratitude, but the knowledge that her work had fulfilled its purpose. As the transport leveled at cruising altitude, Alexis returned to her technical journal, turning to a fresh page. The events of the day had revealed several refinements that could be made to Protocol 37B, subtle adjustments to the sequencing, additional safeguards against overcorrection in the manual override procedures. She began to sketch out these improvements, her mind already moving forward to the next challenge, the next solution. Because that was who Maverick really was. Not a legend or a call sign, but a problem solver who saw patterns others missed and possibilities where others saw only obstacles. And while the passengers of Flight 2937 might remember her as the woman who saved their lives, her greatest impact would be on people she would never meet, on flights that would never make the news, because her protocols would prevent emergencies from becoming disasters in the first place. That was the legacy that mattered, not recognition, but results, not accolades, but lives saved, not the respect she received after revealing her identity, but the solutions she created that would continue working long after today's events were forgotten by all except those who had lived through them. 3 weeks after the emergency landing in Cleveland, Lieutenant Commander Alexis Reeves stood before a panel of senior officers at Naval Aviation Headquarters in Washington, D.C. The briefing room hummed with low conversation that immediately ceased when she entered. Admiral Fletcher, head of the Naval Aviation Development Center, nodded to her from his position at the center of the long table. "Commander Reeves, please proceed with your presentation." Alexis moved to the podium with the same quiet efficiency she brought to all her endeavors. Behind her, a screen displayed technical diagrams that would have been incomprehensible to most people outside this room. "Gentlemen and ladies, Protocol 37B has now been field tested in an actual emergency situation. The results confirm our simulator predictions with 97% accuracy. I recommend immediate implementation across all platforms, rather than waiting for the scheduled quarterly review." For the next 30 minutes, she detailed the technical aspects of what had occurred aboard Flight 2937, breaking down the cascading electrical failure and explaining how her protocol had overcome systems that would have otherwise been unrecoverable. The panel listened with rapt attention, occasionally asking pointed questions that she answered with precision and clarity. When the briefing concluded, Admiral Fletcher stood. "Thank you, Commander. We'll take your recommendation under advisement. In the meantime, you've become something of a celebrity in aviation circles." "That wasn't my intention, sir. Nevertheless, it's reality. The Secretary of the Navy has received multiple inquiries from commercial airlines requesting your participation in their training programs." Fletcher slid a folder across the table to her. "We're prepared to approve a temporary consulting assignment if you're interested." Alexis accepted the folder, but didn't open it. "My preference would be to continue our current research track, sir. Protocol 42A still requires significant refinement before testing." Fletcher exchanged glances with Captain Winters, Alexis's research partner. "Always focused on the next problem, aren't you, Maverick?" The nickname, once used only within her immediate team, had now spread throughout the aviation community. Alexis still wasn't entirely comfortable with it. "That's the job, Admiral." "Indeed it is," Fletcher agreed. "But sometimes the job includes sharing what you've learned. Consider the consulting opportunity, not for the publicity, but for the lives it might save." As the meeting adjourned, Captain Winters approached. "He's right, you know. Your protocols could help a lot more people if they were more widely adopted." "They'll be adopted based on their effectiveness, not because I personally advocate for them," Alexis replied. "That's not always how it works, Lex. Sometimes innovation needs a face, a voice." Winters studied her with the familiarity of a longtime colleague. "The Reeves Protocol saved 183 lives 3 weeks ago. How many more could it save if every airline implemented it immediately instead of waiting for slow regulatory adoption?" Before Alexis could respond, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from Captain Gordon, the pilot from Flight 2937. "Turn on GNN, they're showing the Senate Transportation Committee hearing." Winters noticed her expression change. "What is it?" "Nothing important," Alexis replied, but Winters was already pulling up the news feed on her tablet. On screen, Captain Wesley Riordan, the pilot who had taken Alexis's seat on the flight, was testifying before the Senate Transportation Committee. His voice was clear and authoritative as he addressed the panel. Senators, what happened on Flight 2937 was not just a success story about an emergency landing. It was a wake-up call about how we identify and utilize expertise in aviation. Lieutenant Commander Reeves was removed from her seat and relegated to the back of the aircraft because she didn't fit the profile of what we expect a top aviation expert to look like. Had the emergency occurred without her on board, I cannot say with confidence that the outcome would have been the same. The committee chairman leaned forward. Captain Reardon, are you suggesting that the airline's policies were at fault? I'm suggesting that our entire industry needs to reconsider how we recognize expertise. The Reeves protocol saved that aircraft, yet its creator was deemed less important than a deadheading pilot catching a ride home. Reardon paused. That should concern all of us. Winters switched off the tablet. You've made an impression on him. He's oversimplifying, Alexis said, discomfort evident in her tone. The flight attendants were following standard procedure. A procedure that almost cost 183 lives, Winters countered. Don't you see why this matters beyond the technical aspects? Before Alexis could formulate a response, Admiral Fletcher reappeared at the doorway. Commander Reeves, there's someone here who'd like to meet you. He stepped aside to reveal a young girl in a navy blue dress, her dark braids immediately recognizable to Alexis. It was Zoe, the aspiring pilot from Flight 2937. Commander Maverick, the girl exclaimed, then caught herself. I mean, Commander Reeves. Alexis's professional reserve softened immediately. Hello, Zoe. What brings you to Naval Aviation Headquarters? My dad brought me. He's meeting with the recruitment office. The girl's eyes shone with excitement. I told him I want to be a pilot like you when I grow up. That's a worthy goal, Alexis replied, kneeling to meet Zoe at eye level, as she had done in Cleveland. Have you started your training yet? Dad got me flight simulator software after what happened. I practice every day. Zoe hesitated, then asked with childish directness, Is it hard being a girl pilot? The boys in my class still say girls aren't as good at flying. The question hung in the air, deceptively simple, yet layered with implications that Alexis had navigated throughout her career. She considered her response carefully, aware of Winters and Fletcher watching with interest. Flying isn't about being a boy or a girl, Zoe. It's about understanding how things work and making good decisions when it matters. Some people might not see your abilities right away, but that doesn't change what you can do. Zoe nodded seriously, like how no one knew you were Maverick until the plane had problems. Exactly like that. Can I show you my logbook? I've been tracking my simulator hours just like Dad taught me. I'd like that very much. As Zoe eagerly pulled a small notebook from her backpack, Admiral Fletcher drew Captain Winters aside. This is exactly why I want her doing consultation work. Look at the impact she's having on that child. Winters smiled. Good luck convincing her of that. Reeves has always preferred to let her work speak for itself. Sometimes the work needs a voice to be heard, Fletcher mused. Even Maverick protocols need a Maverick to champion them. Later that afternoon, Alexis sat alone in her office reviewing the consulting proposal. The program would place her as a technical advisor to 3 major airlines, helping integrate her protocols into their training and emergency response systems. It would mean temporarily stepping away from her research, but the potential impact was undeniable. Thousands of aircraft equipped with systems that could prevent tragedies before they occurred. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Captain Elliot Gordon stood in the doorway, now dressed in civilian clothes. Captain Gordon? Alexis greeted him, genuine surprise in her voice. I didn't expect to see you here. I hope I'm not intruding, Gordon replied. I was invited to speak at your simulator facility about the Cleveland incident. Thought I'd stop by and see how you're doing. I'm well, thank you. Please, come in. Gordon entered, taking in the office with interest. Unlike most offices decorated with accomplishments and memorabilia, Alexis's space was almost Spartan. A few technical manuals, engineering diagrams on the walls, and a single model aircraft on her desk, a prototype she had helped design. No press clippings? Gordon asked with a smile. You're something of a celebrity these days. So I've been told, Alexis replied dryly. How are you adjusting after the incident? Gordon's expression grew more serious. Better than some. I've been doing this long enough to compartmentalize, but I've thought a lot about what happened, not just the emergency, but before that. Before? When Dorothea asked you to give up your seat. Gordon met her eyes directly. I've been in aviation for 22 years, Commander. I've never once questioned who sits in those front rows, never wondered about the assumptions we make, until now. Alexis remained silent, waiting for him to continue. I watched the Senate hearing this morning. Reardon made some good points. He's entitled to his perspective. It's more than perspective. It's about recognition. Not for ego, but for efficacy. Gordon leaned forward. Do you know how many airlines have fully implemented your protocols? Approximately 37% of major carriers, Alexis answered promptly. Another 42% have partial implementation pending further review. And how many lives could those protocols save if universally adopted? Alexis hesitated. That's speculative. It depends on incident rates and not so speculative, Gordon interrupted gently. Your own research estimates a 62% reduction in electrical system-related accidents. That's hundreds of lives annually. The protocols will be adopted based on their merit, Alexis insisted. That's how innovation should work. In an ideal world, perhaps. Gordon smiled sadly. But in the real world, innovation needs advocates. Sometimes, the most brilliant solutions languish because no one champions them effectively. He stood, moving to the window that overlooked the airfield, where test aircraft waited on the tarmac. You know, when I realized who you were in that cockpit, that the protocols I'd studied, the systems I'd trained on, were created by the same person now saving my aircraft, it changed something fundamental for me. How so? It made the abstract concrete. It wasn't just procedures in a manual anymore. It was a real person with real insight. Gordon turned back to face her. That matters, Commander. Not because you need recognition, but because your work needs a human connection to reach its full potential. The words echoed uncomfortably close to what Admiral Fletcher and Captain Winters had been saying. Alexis looked down at the consulting proposal on her desk. I'm an engineer, Captain, not an advocate. With respect, Commander, you became both the moment you said Maverick on my flight. Gordon moved toward the door. You may not have sought this platform, but you have it now. The question is what you'll do with it. After Gordon departed, Alexis remained at her desk, contemplating the consulting proposal with new perspective. The path of quiet expertise had defined her career, letting her work speak for itself while she remained in the background. But perhaps there were times when expertise required a voice, when innovation needed an advocate to fulfill its life-saving potential. Her phone buzzed with a message from Winters. Gordon spoke with Fletcher. They're both making the same case, aren't they? Alexis typed back, they think I should be the face of the protocols, not just their creator. They're right, came the immediate response. Remember why you created them in the first place. The question took Alexis back to the beginning, to the crash that had claimed the lives of her first research team 7 years ago, a catastrophic electrical failure that current protocols couldn't address. The determination that had driven her to develop new approaches to ensure that type of accident never happened again. She had created the protocols to save lives. If becoming more visible would help them save more lives, could she justify remaining in the shadows? With sudden clarity, she signed the consulting agreement and forwarded it to Admiral Fletcher. Then she opened her laptop and began preparing a presentation, not filled with technical specifications and engineering diagrams, but focused on practical implementation and real-world applications that any airline could understand and adopt. The next morning, Captain Winters found Alexis in the simulator room, running through emergency scenarios with a group of commercial airline pilots. She was describing the early warning signs of electrical failure that had been present on Flight 2937, signs that might have been addressed before they cascaded into crisis. The vibration pattern is distinctive, she explained, demonstrating on the controls. If you recognize it early, you can implement isolation protocols before systems begin to fail. The pilots watched with rapt attention, many taking notes. This wasn't just a technical briefing, it was experiential knowledge being transferred from someone who had lived through the scenario they hoped never to face. Winters waited until the session ended before approaching. This is new for you, teaching instead of researching. It's still research, Alexis replied, just applied differently. Applied through people, not just systems. Winters smiled. Turns out Maverick does need a human face after all. Not for recognition, Alexis clarified, for implementation. Same result, Winters shrugged. More lives saved. And that ultimately was what mattered most. Not the visibility or the accolades, but the knowledge that her work would reach its full potential. That the next time an aircraft faced catastrophic failure, the pilots would have the tools they needed, whether she was physically present or not. As she prepared for the next session, Alexis noticed a familiar face entering the simulator facility. Zoe, accompanied by her father, had returned for the public tour of the aviation center. The girl spotted Alexis and waved excitedly. "Commander Maverick, I'm learning about flight controls today." Alexis waved back, realizing that perhaps the most important advocacy wasn't happening in Senate hearings or airline boardrooms, but right here, showing a young girl that expertise could wear any face, take any form, and make a difference when it mattered most. That was a legacy worth stepping into the spotlight for, however briefly. Not to be recognized, but to ensure that others like her would be. Not after emergencies revealed their capabilities, but before their contributions could save lives. In that moment, Maverick ceased to be merely a call sign and became instead a philosophy. Innovation that broke barriers not for its own sake, but because lives depended on it. And sometimes that meant not just creating the protocols, but championing them as well. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition, but deserved more than anyone else? Someone whose quiet expertise suddenly revealed itself in a moment of crisis? Share your story of the unsung heroes in your life who make a difference without seeking the spotlight. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you value stories about those who lead through quiet competence rather than loud authority, consider subscribing for more narratives that celebrate the extraordinary people hidden in plain sight all around us.